and then tell me when you're ready for me to step in. And just keep it going.
Okay.
So this morning we're going to address the 20th chapter of Exodus. Those of you that have familiar yourselves with the Bible, you'll know right away that the 20th chapter of Exodus is the 10 Commandments. We have on our graphics this morning and also on our bulletin the 2 tablets that we can just see Moses scribing the 10 laws from God. And so here we have the bust of Moses as he is in the movie The 10 Commandments, standing there on the mountaintop with the 2 tablets and the wind blowing his hair. As we discussed this morning, if we were talking about John the Baptist, that would be John the Baptist just after he baptized Jesus. But this morning, it is Moses. It reminds me of Charlton Heston, but I wanted to share with you the significance of the altar this morning. In our last song, before we started this section of our worship, the lyrics, the seasons change, you stay the same. God is like that, isn't he? The seasons of our lives change. God is constant, unconditional love, and that's who God is now and always. So I've entitled my message for this morning, God's Law Builds Character. It is the 1st through the 20th verses in the book of Exodus, in the 20th chapter. And before we read this, I want you to put in your mind this thought that I have. The Israelites have been freed from slavery by God. They're journeying from slavery into the promised land. A short journey that for some of them lasts a lifetime. They pause along the way at Mount Sinai, where Moses goes up upon the hill and receives from God directions for the way we are to live. Place yourself at the right and left side of Moses and hear these words. God spoke all these words. I am God, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of a life of slavery. No other gods, only me. No carved gods of any size, shape, or form of anything. Whatever, whether of things that fly or walk or swim. Don't bow down to them, and don't serve them, because I am God, your God, and I'm a most jealous God, punishing the children for any sins their parents pass on to them, to the 3rd, and yes, even to the 4th generation of those who hate me. But I'm unswervingly loyal to the thousands who love me, and those who keep my commandments, not using the name of God, your God, in curse or silly banter. God won't put up with the irreverent use of his name. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Work 6 days and do everything you need to do, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to God, your God. Don't do any work. Not you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your servants, nor your maid, nor your animals, not even foreign guests visiting in your town. For in 6 days God made heaven, earth, and sea, and everything in them. And then he rested on the 7th day. Therefore God blessed the Sabbath day, and he set it apart as a holy day. Honor your father and mother so that you will live a long time in the land that God, your God, is giving you. No murder, no adultery, no stealing, no lies about your neighbor, no lusting after your neighbor's house or wife or servant or maid or ox or donkey. Don't set your heart on anything that is your neighbor's. All the people experiencing the thunder and lightning, the trumpet blast, and the smoking mountains were afraid. They pulled back and stood at a distance. They said to Moses, "You speak to us and we'll listen, but don't have God speak to us or we'll die." So Moses spoke to the people. "Don't be afraid. God has come to test you and instill a deep and reverent awe within you so that you won't sin." It's the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Now, the first 4 of the 10 commandments are merely a justification for the last 6. In other words, the 10 commandments introduce our world to an idea that God cares most about how we treat one another. Now, if you compare that to the times that they were living, well, actually, if you compare that to all times, the Greek myth, the gods, small g, were really preoccupied with whether the human beings showed them due respect that they felt they deserved. And those gods, small g gods, didn't make rules for how people were to interact between themselves, amongst themselves. Then in the Torah, God's rules are about shaping human character and caring for human needs. Because you see, God's children everywhere and all times are of concern to the Creator. Now in Judaism, it tells us that our ethical conduct comes from the realization that we're all part of the same family. We all have the same divine parent. And if you were to take the strands of our spiritual DNA and unravel them, you would discover a spark of the one who created the world in every human being. What are we afraid will happen if we stop doing what we should according to the laws of God? We have been taught, mistakenly I might add, we have been taught that if we don't, as we should, motivate ourselves into action, we'll become like the giant sloths that just hang there in the trees and become inert. I just had this flash this afternoon. We're taking our family over to the Museum of Natural History, and they have an exhibit of animals that are slow. And they actually have a real live living sloth, like Sid in the nursery, the stuffed sloth in the nursery, and our grandson will be delighted to actually see a living sloth and a turtle and a snake and other things that move slowly. But the fear is that if we do not participate in the way that God calls us to live, that we become like those sloths of no importance to the world. And even if we don't force ourselves into being good, we won't be good. That's what we've been told, isn't it? If we're not self-motivated in that direction, we become unkind, ungenerous, ungrateful, unproductive. Basically, any unword that you could come up with. That is a dark vision of our basic nature of who we are as human creatures. Self-motivating ourselves in a God direction actually strengthens our belief. But if left to our own devices, we cannot even feel like we can be trusted. Because you see, so much of our behavior is driven by this tendency of should do. Here's what we should do. And in that, we seem to be losing our ability to distinguish what we really desire, what we really want. We've been taught all of our lives that we should want, and we are seeming to forget what we actually want. And sometimes we confuse the two, which is which, should and desire. That puts us out of touch with our own desires. We have this sense, this loss of intimacy with ourselves. We know how we're supposed to act, but we don't really understand who we are. The most frequent result of should-do thinking is procrastination. We can all attest to being masters of that at times in our life. Often individuals find themselves thinking about work, what's coming up in the following week, the things that I should do. And those should-do thoughts rush in and give us a feeling of guilt and depression if we don't carry out to the letter of the law those things that we feel we should do. This often changes us internally and mentally, and it can refocus our attention to something that becomes unpleasant. The more we should do ourselves, the harder it becomes to actually spend any time in accomplishing what we must do. And then we become people who are looking for that little round to it. I'll do it when I get around to it. And even those of us who had very kind and loving parents found as children there was this authority figure in our lives that imposed these obligations upon us of things that we would not have chosen to do for ourselves. Let me think about that for a second. As a child, I would not have chosen to clean my room every day. I would not have chosen to take out the trash every week. I would not have chosen to mow the yard when it started to get long. And then when we grow up a little bit further, we will find ourselves in school, and here's another authoritative figure, a teacher who will set a whole new list of things that we should do, not because we want to do them, but because somebody else said that we should do them. That was necessarily when we were children. However, now that we're adults, there's no parental figure that says that you must do these things. Well, that's not necessarily true, is it? Because there's things that replace our parents who were nagging us. Oh, that's not a good word, probably. Candy would say she's reminding me. But that has a negative effect on who we are, doesn't it? It makes us want to do no tasks rather than those tasks. We started out with laws build character, didn't we? No. We started out with God's laws build character. And as adults, we tend to believe and generally understand that we are free to choose what to do and what not to do. You don't need advanced education to make those decisions. You're perfectly free to change your direction from a formal and prescribed direction to something else. But whatever we choose, we all understand that there are always consequences. One way to break and hold on to that automatic should-do feeling is to substitute that word should with choose. So what if you were changing all of your should-do statements into I choose to do this? Instead of I should do my chores today, I should take out the trash today before the trash man comes. What if I get up and say that morning, I choose to take the trash out this morning? That one basic thought makes us feel like free agents. It's that word that we talk about so often. freedom of choice. We do this not because we have to. We then do this because we choose to do that. And if we choose to do it, then we don't really believe that we should have done it in the first place. Now, since Moses first chiseled those 10 commandments on those 2 stone tablets, which have now been copied and reproduced and installed, erected, proclaimed, translated, repeated millions of times in millions of different ways, don't they remind you of the duties we feel towards God as being human beings? In fact, the tablets seem to reflect a division of thinking. These are God's rules, or are they people rules? Actually, they are intertwined to be the same, right? Our understanding of neighborly obligations demand from us a knowledge of who God really is, a single and supreme God of creation, who demands from us unwavering obedience and worship. We call that ethical monotheism. There's no second thoughts of this. There's one true God whom we know and worship. We know the basics of what God desires of us. So He does not choose for us to murder or lie or steal. This is not the true nature of God. And it becomes very important to us as human individuals for family and our homes. And here's the catch to this. The way we act as adults is almost a mirror reflection by our children of who we are as parents. So this idea of being able to choose instead of I must or I should do is that free will that moves us closer to actually doing something because we desire to, rather than the should-dos that lead us to guilt and depression. And although the rules of the second tablet flow from the first, we don't have to be religious, we don't have to be super godly to understand their importance. If we live in a community with each other, we must abide by the should-dos and ought-do things of the community, and that's the way it survives. No lying, no stealing, no murder, no adultery. Those are things that are human traits that pull our community stronger together. The 10 Commandments, of course, are only a small part of what God desires of us. No, what God demands of us. That sidebar that we talked about for Moses as they were slowing down and stopping on their wilderness adventure. When Moses stopped to receive those 10 commandments, it was a way to organize and to encourage godly behavior. But human behavior took that 3-month journey of the wilderness and made it a 40-year adventure. When we obey the thoughts of the should-do thoughts of our world, that's the only call that we can make. But when we counsel with family and friends, it's important. But ultimately, don't we make decisions on our own? Ultimately, we decide for ourselves what we should and should not do. But when we listen to God's words, God talking, there's no ambiguity, no second guessing. There's no argument about whether to be obedient. When God speaks, we should. We must. I want to leave you with some thoughts of the psalmist, something that the psalmist scribed that turns it from should to choose. I delight in obeying the Lord. But do you become abrasive under the spirit of obligation, even if it brings joy to your spouse and to your children? The answer to that is, of course, not. Joy brings joy. And therefore, we can delight in the commands of the Lord, because all of those should-do statements have been removed. It's no longer an obligation. It's a joy. Because when serving God with joy, we're also serving others that we love with joy. And so I would say to you this morning, let us revel in the words of the psalmist when they wrote, "Happy are those who delight in the law of the Lord, and on His law may they meditate day and night. In all that they do, let them prosper." And so I guess God's laws do build character. And all the children say, Amen. Amen.